The reason why East Asia was growing, one reason was with a very undervalued exchange rate, and people were praising this policy. So the idea of having a factor, gas or oil, that would lead to an appreciation of the real exchange rate, naturally would say, well, this is not a good thing. If the secret to grow well is to have an underappreciated exchange rate, the fact of having natural resources really goes against this. So in that intellectual climate, policy climate of 70s, 80s, I think this was very conducive to the idea of Dutch business, because this appeal, you have this appreciated exchange rate, so you grow less. Also, that has been intellectually come into as being criticized, and the reason is that as we came, I think, at the period of Washington Consensus, late 80s, early 90s, distorting relative prices is not a good idea. In fact, there are other factors why East Asia grew. And basically, if you try to keep down the real exchange rate, you are kind of shooting the messengers. You are not really addressing the issue. The issue is that when the natural resources stop growing, you cannot shift back the resources to the other productive sector. It's not that the relative prices change. So the entire focus on fighting the messenger, fighting the real appreciation, fighting wages increasing is not really, intellectually you have to look back to the primary reason why you cannot shift back resources. Could be that fiscally you are unable to shift the resources. Could be, a good example is given actually from the Russia. Russia developed a lot the north, which is probably, once energy is out, it's not so efficient to have so many cities north. There is a book about this actually. And the real issue is not is to ask what is not working in the housing market and why these people are not coming back. Is not to have an underappreciated exchange rate to make up for this. So you have to look intellectually at the first reason why you cannot shift resources back, and afterwards do this. So this first version of Dutch disease, which is very important, and probably is the first, and as I said before, produced a huge amount of papers. I think had some problems, especially in the policy, the way in which it was applied. I go quickly to the second. Why am I going back? Okay, I cannot get out of the Dutch. It's a curse. Okay. Well, this was a focus on medium term, because now let's go back to the short term. And in addition to ample fluctuations, we have short-time fluctuation. We are thinking about months. And here I'm using the chapter 4 of the last wheel, where there was an extensive study on this. As I repeat, it's indicative that it's focused on the short term, because somewhat on the medium term, there are all these caveats that I described. And here, what they did is basically, they just documented that natural resources have shifts, have some short, big movement in the short term, and they asked what are the consequences and what is the best policy reaction to these shocks. There is no, we cannot deny that there are this movement, and this to illustrate how much is the duration of these swings. I don't have time here to illustrate, but you can find it online, and I think it's very nice reading. Yes, this actually using the they basically documented what are the consequences in terms of GDP growth of a swing in the price of natural resources. And yes, you see, if you have an upswing, you basically grow quite a bit, 4%. If you have a long, you grow even more, per year, and if you have an abrupt, very sharp, you work very, if the slope of the increase of the price of natural resources, you increase quite a bit. And they did it for various types of resources. To save time, I will just focus on this. The question is this: why now? Once they establish that you have a swing in natural resources that we know, and they have implication for the GDP growth and for the current account, for inflation, what are the policy responses? And here the profession, I think, has come to a very clear conclusion. Basically, do on fiscal policy to do smoothing and counter-cyclical fiscal policy of some sort. On monetary policy to do inflation targeting. The rationale is that, just to have an idea, in alternative you could do like exchange rate. This is not a good idea. Actually, if you look at the countries which peg the exchange rate, they exacerbate the fluctuations in GDP when in response to a negative, to a shock to the price of natural resources. The intuition is that if you do inflation targeting, the work that has to do to stabilize output, fiscal policy is relatively less, because you have an extra kick by devaluation, depreciation of your currency. So if you have a negative shock, the fiscal policy turns out to be expansionary, but not as much, because on the other hand you have depreciating exchange rate, which gives the economy an extra kick. And basically, using GIMS, which is our internal model that we use for our projections, they simulated an economy which is roughly like Russia. I would say export of energy is about, of oil is 50%, inflation targeting. Russia is not yet there, but it's almost. And they simulated various fiscal rules, and they basically they found that the best fiscal rule is one which delivers counter-cyclical fiscal policy. Also here, the professor didn't come to this conclusion straight away. There was some, I don't go into the details, but I think that in the 90s it was recognized the cost of fluctuating, of GDP fluctuation, not just in terms of this, but for instance, there is a nice paper that shows that economies that fluctuate a lot also have lower growth in the long run. And the reason is that there is more uncertainty, and so people are reluctant to invest, especially in physical, but especially in human capital. And this is a problem. So this is now I talk briefly on the how many minutes? 1 minute? 2 minutes. Okay, 1 minute to talk about the long run. Okay, but well, the long run is relatively new, and it's something that was always always there. But I think regained currency came from another literature on growth. In the mid-90s, you started stressing the idea that institutions, cultural factors are important to explain long-term economic performance. So basically it goes back to what Ian was saying, well, that the effect of a natural resource on the economy depends at the end of the day on the institutional framework of the economy. And so it could be a blessing or the course depending on this. There is a nice book by Daron Acemoglu and Robinson, I think, yes, and on documenting this historically. And the problem that I found with that literature is very nice, but we don't know how to invent a good institutions where they are not there. What we also learn is that you cannot simply take institutions and just plug it. And this is a big challenge. So to go back, I think that, just to summarize, Dutch disease is in reality Dutch diseases. And just to have an idea, we have to separate short-term, medium term. On short term, the recipe is very clear, and I think there is broad agreement. Maybe it's difficult politically to implement it, but conceptually has been, a consensus has been reached within the profession. which is basically smooth fiscal policy, and with the fiscal rule, the kind of that Russia just implemented, which is a very wise and very important step. And at the same time, coupled with inflation targeting, which is also a move where Russia is going. On the medium term, where economists focus a lot of attention, we have to be sure, because what we learn is that we do not have to cure just the messengers. Some messengers are unavoidable, like appreciation. It's a natural response. What we have to cure is a reason why this damages the economy in the long run. And now, so we have to focus on what we call in jargon marketing protection. And on the long run, it's very promising, very interesting, and there is a lot of evidence, but we really don't know how to move from one to the other. It's unfortunately.
Сейчас я предоставлю слово Кэрол Леонард. Многие знают Кэрол как профессора Оксфордского университета. В последние годы она работает в Академии народного хозяйства, и совсем последнее время как проректор Академии.
May I also say, especially observing one of my colleagues in the audience, that I'm at the High School of Economics, chair of the new Department of Regional Studies in Public and State Administration. I am in a very distinguished crowd here. I had expected Governor Yanko to cover Russian macro. What I wanted to say, however, is I have a somewhat different perspective on it, perhaps because I view the problem of Dutch disease as divided in the literature into two parts. One would be that about the technical measurement of Dutch disease, and the other would be the oil curse, or the Dutch curse, which has attracted a large literature in political economy, largely developed on the basis of cross-sectional, various kinds of panel data, exploring correlations and models having to do with what are the consequences of the Dutch disease. And so what I wanted to do is just simply say, for one thing, because I have written about this, that there are a fairly standard set of measures for the Dutch disease, as it's called. As you say, there's no vaccination for it, so you just look to see why, how it's identified, which would lie largely in the exchange rate and the movement of resources, prices of non-tradables, and so forth. Look for the dread result of the hollowing out of the non-tradable sector. The other thing, however, is that in the actual measurement for countries such as I look at, Russia and Kazakhstan, it's very difficult to actually determine, and these are really tricky measures. And so I would like to talk about what it's like to go to the gym as you get older. In other words, you see a country which has commodities exports and huge amounts, and you see Russia is increasing the percentage of oil and gas resources in its revenues, and you see that the role of oil and gas in GDP is high. Governor Yanko has presented his many times his data showing the correlation between GDP and oil prices. So what do? You lie down and die, or you go to the gym every day, and you build a policy, and you'll see in many of these countries, Kazakhstan and Russia in particular, policies going up which are scarcely preventative, but I think very helpful. And they don't, I'm moving away a little bit from the macro side toward, if you say, we're looking at the results of the curse, how can you not prevent it, but how can you act so as to keep it from deepening? Now, one of the big stories, of course, in Dutch disease is Norway. And Norway should have Dutch disease, but no one has ever accused Norway, with its overwhelming amount of natural mineral sources, of being an underdeveloped economy. And so there, it did likewise, and certainly Holland never said that it was less than a very powerfully developed, advanced economy. And so how does that work? I mean, was the disease really a curse? And I think I was delighted with the first talk that suggested that they had in fact solved some of these problems. And my general point of view is that Russia the Russian government is very much going to the gym, and we've got a lot of policies in place which are helping. And there was an article not so long ago at Forbes suggesting that look at that exchange rate. That in I think just a few years ago it was down as it was certainly not overvalued, and we've got a very good macroeconomic policy, and you've got some first-rate experts doing the fiscal side. So we say, are there? Then we ask ourselves, are there really ways to go to the gym to avoid the disease? And you would say, well, what are these connections that we're looking at? And one connection, for example, would be the resource curse in the political sense and civil war. But you can't really find a connection that's not got so many omitted variables that it's obscure whether that's the case. Does the resource curse spiral out of control when it affects politics? Does it crush democracy? And you really can't find examples of that. Hirschman established a very interesting set of principles. That is, if you hollow out the manufacturing or the non-tradable sector, and this I think where my very distinguished colleague has written a lot about this, about the Dutch disease, this is where, from the IMF, is it really permanent? I mean, do you have, a Hirschman effect would be permanent. You'd say it allows the resource sector to drain the rest of the economy of agglomeration effects. And so as a policy, what I'm trying to say is a policy, the Russian government has poured itself into agglomeration economies. And there are some, not just isolated experiences. Sometimes we think of the Skolkolas and the innovation efforts, and these are not isolated, by no means unsuccessful. So can you protect yourself that way? And these are questions I ask of the audience and of fellow colleagues. Can you protect yourself by getting the non-oil deficit down? And certainly that would be something that right now the Russian government is thinking about. Kazakhstan has done very well. I think it's down to about 6 or 7%. Azerbaijan is in much worse shape on the non-oil deficit. Can you protect yourself by putting your money into education and skills? And this tends to be where resource curse-burdened countries have problems, that their educational institutions are not well funded, and you have perhaps a lot of bright people at the top, but that middle-level managerial class to be supported. And I think we're looking at a renaissance of higher education in Russia. And this is a country which is really pouring money into its educational system in lots of different ways, and not just the higher educational system. Can you try to diversify exports? Well, as I said, I wanted to draw one's attention to the fact that what you're concerned about that because of innovation. And because if you rob the economy of its innovative potential, you've done something permanent to it. But on the other hand, if you can promote innovation where it will help the entire economy, for example, in the oil sector, you have in some sense gone to the gym. And the Norwegians certainly did that. The Norwegians grappled with this issue and poured money into science, and especially the science of exploration. And so they have this government linkage between the scientists and the oil sector. And there was a lot of profit in the educational sector from Norwegian policy. Thus far, let me just draw to a close by talking about some of these innovation projects, since I see the Dutch disease largely in terms of its inhibition of innovation. And we're talking about, as I say, not just Skolkovo, I want to mention Tomsk and various other RT technoparks, of which there are numerous ones in vast economic zones. And your government has been working on this for a number of years, and they're not about to go to sleep in the pilot's cabin. So then I close by asking questions. As I said, I left the Russian macro story to Gavrilenko, who doesn't have to be here, but I'm sure that Martin will pick that one up. first question that I have in mind is, are you safe if you have a successful oil fund policy? Does that secure you against Dutch disease? And an oil fund policy would be, and of course the Russian oil fund is the welfare fund is there, but you also get the Future Generations Fund is filling up again. It was devastated during the recession. The second, are Russia's regions safe? In Canada, there's an enormous concern. It would be easy if we could talk about fiscal policy having just a federal government. We don't have that in Canada. And you have a problem of devolution. And who is to decide this question? Is it for the federal government to protect a region which is peaking in oil, or is that for the region itself to take measures and develop its own oil fund? Third question, how much diversification is enough to protect yourself from the dreaded curse of the oil curse? And for, once again, returning to this point I'd like to emphasize, what sector should be innovative in an oil-rich country? Where's the logic of having innovation in lots of different sectors? Of course, that's diversification. So much that you can have that, but don't you also need to work on the innovation in the oil sector? And with those brief words, I would close.
Спасибо. Я передаю теперь слово Антону Викторовичу Даниляну. До сих пор мы слышали выступления экономистов, был представлен взгляд со стороны, на проблему со стороны экономистов. Антон Викторович, он может со всех сторон посмотреть на проблему, поскольку он одновременно в одном лице и экономист, и сейчас представитель бизнес-сообщества, он является сопредседателем бизнес-ассоциации «Деловая Россия» и имеет большой опыт работы в органах власти, где участвовал в выработке экономической политики, в том числе в тот период, когда мы боролись с нашей голландской болезнью. Так что мы надеемся на такой стереоскопический взгляд, вклад в нашу дискуссию. Пожалуйста, Антон Викторович.
Спасибо большое, Евсей Томович. Я буду с вашим позволением говорить по-русски, в России я говорю по-русски. У меня действительно несколько своеобразный взгляд на эту тему. Мне кажется, что у нас есть определенная подмена понятий, и классическое понимание голландской болезни – это все-таки тот негативный эффект на экономику, который воздействует именно с укрепления национальной валюты. И это укрепление, которое происходит вследствие резкого увеличения экспортных доходов. Вот негативное влияние самих по себе экспортных доходов на экономику, на отдельные отрасли, там, на какие-то просто инфляции, безработицы и так далее. А именно укрепление национальной валюты, вот именно это воздействие. У нас же большей частью под голландской болезнью понимается именно негативное влияние вот этих вот резко увеличившихся экспортных доходов. Здесь я хотел бы обратить внимание на следующее. На самом деле не принципиально, откуда именно берутся эти экспортные доходы. Это могут быть отнюдь не нефть и газ и какие-то добывающие секторы. Скажем, Китай также в некоторый момент, благодаря своей политике, в течение потом многих лет, имел резко увеличившиеся экспортные доходы благодаря тем предприятиям перерабатывающей промышленности, которые вследствие иностранных инвестиций образовывались в особых экономических зонах, а дальше и по другой части экономики. Тем не менее, никакой голландской болезни в чистом виде не наблюдалось. Почему? Потому что все-таки я настаиваю на том, что голландская болезнь – это негативный эффект, который дает именно укрепление курса национальной валюты. А как известно, Китай привязал курс национальной валюты к доллару США и тем самым выбил возможность развития голландской болезни на чистоту и сразу. Там могут развиваться другие болезни, но уж в любом случае не голландская. Теперь посмотрим на другую сторону. А на какие именно части экономики оказывает негативный эффект рост курса национальной валюты? Обычно говорят, что в этой связи растет инфляция и растет безработица, поскольку те сектора, те предприятия открытого сектора национальной экономики, которые не получают этих доходов, и с другой стороны у них, наоборот, вследствие укрепления национальной валюты растет себестоимость, падает рентабельность, вот они закрываются как предприятия и растет безработица, соответственно, вот эти вот негативные эффекты являются главными, да, следствиями и симптомами голландской болезни. Посмотрим на российскую действительность. Если мы говорим на период до 1998 года, то о голландской болезни речь идти не могло, потому что курс вел себя совершенно противоположным образом. И там был валютный коридор, и довольно жестко все регулировалось. Кризис 1998 года привел к тому, что курс резко обесценился, национальная валюта рубль резко обесценилась. И так продолжалось вплоть до 2003 года. Несмотря на то, что сначала уже пошел вверх ВВП, это началось в последние 2 месяца 2008 года, потом после Косовской войны стали расти цены на нефть. И, соответственно, возникли вот те самые дополнительные доходы от экспорта. Но, повторяю, курс при этом продолжал падать. И это происходило вплоть до конца 2002 года. Поэтому, с точки зрения анализа собственно голландской болезни, представляет интерес период с 2003 года по первую половину 2008 года для России. Вот в этот период действительно наблюдалось в среднем такое последовательное укрепление рубля. И, стало быть, можно было бы смотреть, какое влияние оказывало это укрепление на национальную экономику. Что мы имеем в действительности? В течение всего этого периода темпы инфляции не увеличивались, а падали. Безработица не увеличилась, а снижалась. Отрасли экономики развивались в значительной степени практически все. И тем самым даже симптомов голландской болезни в чистом виде, в том понимании, которое, собственно, академическое, не было. Хотя накапливались те самые негативные влияния на экономику, которые связаны не с укреплением курса национальной валюты, а как раз с золотым дождем от экспортных доходов, от нефтегазового сектора и некоторых других традиционных товаров российского экспорта. Но, скажем, такой традиционный товар российского экспорта, как вооружение, которое является классическим элементом обрабатывающей промышленности, в основном машиностроение, но там есть элементы тяжелой химии и многих других отраслей, не связанных, собственно, с нефтегазовым сектором. Этот сектор также наращивал свой экспорт. Сейчас мы имеем устойчивое второе место, которое даже последних кризис 4-5 лет никак не поколебал. А некоторые отрасли также увеличили свое присутствие, хотя их доля упала, поскольку темп получения экспортных доходов от нефтегазового сектора был больше, чем темп получения экспортных доходов от многих-многих других предприятий и отраслей. Мы в деловой России лет 5 назад провели обследование рентабельности, и сейчас вот обновили недавно его, среди 182 отраслей, подотраслей экономики России. И мы получили цифры с 1999 года по 2011 год, что средний уровень рентабельности колебался от 9 до 19% на этом отрезке. И это было существенно выше, чем в Европе и во многих других странах мира. Тем самым, те самые отрасли, на которых, по идее, должна воздействовать голландская болезнь, точнее, укрепление национальной валюты, не получили такого вот шокового воздействия, как это было в Голландии и во многих других странах, где, собственно, эта голландская болезнь наблюдается. Почему это происходило? Есть несколько объяснений. Объяснение номер 1 связано с тем, что экспортные доходы, которые Россия получает, в первую очередь, от нефтегазового сектора, проникают гораздо глубже в экономику страны, чем во многих других странах, благодаря очень мощному бюджетному перераспределению, государственному заказу, а также, как ни странно, определенным налоговым льготам. Ну, например, там, ну, не только налоговым, но и таможенным, например, из-за чего пошло активное развитие автомобильной промышленности, было создано несколько площадок сборочных, несколько десятков